Hi there, everyone. Welcome back to another week of critical thinking. Welcome to Module 4. We are about halfway now through the course, which is super exciting and also crazy to think about, given that feels like we just started. This week, we are starting to change the pace of the topic that we are looking at here in this class. So far in the class, we have looked at what are arguments, what are premises, what are claims, what are propositions. Then we sort of started thinking about how we could complicate those concepts. This week, we're turning our eyes towards language, right? Now that you know what arguments are and you know what we're doing when we are stating our premises, you've begun to sort of analyze why we believe the things we believe, the sort of logic structures behind those beliefs. Now I'm going to have us start thinking about how we actually speak about those premises, claims, propositions, and arguments, because the language we use is actually very important and can have certain ramifications for the logic structure of our arguments, right? So the subject that we're looking at is language. There is a whole area of philosophy that deals with the philosophy of language. That is not, we're not going to go that into depth this week. But I do think to start, we can sort of ask ourselves what it is a language is doing. I think people think language and communication is much easier than it actually is. The ability to have some idea, articulate it, and then communicate that idea to another person is much harder than most of us give it credit for. I think you could think about a disagreement or a time someone misunderstood you and that sort of caused a rift between you and this other person. I think that is sort of an example that at times our ability to explain ourselves or explain what we mean when we say certain things is actually not as easy as we tend to imagine. I can tell you as your instructor, like, I have had to think about how to communicate the stuff that I spent years studying, because when I first started teaching this stuff, I started teaching high schoolers. When I first started teaching this stuff, to get a high schooler to understand a topic that I spent 6 years just taking for granted I understood was a skill I had to build, and I'm still building and hoping that I am getting better as time goes on at doing. Language also means like something else. Like, I have a bachelor's degree in French. I speak French fluently, and I think about this a lot when I am interpreting or translating between two languages. And if you speak another language, this might be a good analogy for you. But at times, the way we string together words in English does not cleanly translate into French, despite French and English already being much more similar languages than English might be to other languages that you or family members from your family may speak. But my point of bringing it up is at times it is difficult to interpret, or I sort of have to back up and think what I mean when I say certain things in English, because translating literally is not an effective way of translation. So language is hard. I might have misunderstood something you said to me in an email or on a discussion board post at some point this semester. I might have misunderstood something you were suggesting, might have misrepresented an idea you had. And usually when that happens, I like to think I'm able to back up and go, let's try and figure out what's going on here. Part of why language is hard is because there's two levels to communication, right? When you are going to communicate with me, there's two different things that go into that communication, right? There's the thing that you are thinking. You might think of this as what you want to say. But when you become aware that you want to communicate an idea to a person, just because you have some demonstrated understanding of the idea in your head or a demonstrated familiarity with the concept, that doesn't always mean that you know how to tell someone what it is you're thinking. I told you earlier in our semester, you could imagine a person who has great ideas but is the wrong person to explain those ideas to people. Part of why that happens, I think, is this sort of dissonance here. Dissonance meaning like distance. Like, there's a distance between what language is doing, between what we say and what we think or what we want to say. Remember rhetoric. Rhetoric is working here. And ideally, reasoning is working here. If you're thinking about ideas, if you're making sense of them, if you're have premises and claims and reasons you believe things, That level of interpretation of the world happens here in the what we think or what we want to say category, and rhetoric, which is sort of the art or the study of public speaking, of stylistics, of communicating ideas, of communications. If you take classes in public speaking and communications, you might hear this word rhetoric. Sometimes it's called forensics, but forensics is more like debate. Rhetoric um, is happening at the what we say level in a way that reasoning usually happens at the what we think level. And communicating concepts in the world rhetorically or in our language is super difficult. And that is what I want to look at this because I want to think about briefly how we can use language to communicate our ideas. Remember, I told you though, I care much more about your reasoning in this class than I do about your rhetoric. That's not changing this week. I only care about rhetoric insofar as it serves your reasoning for the purposes of this class. This class is called critical thinking. It's not called communications, public speaking, rhetoric. I need to assess your ability to think critically and to reason through issues. So this like what we think category, I think is super interesting and what I want to focus on for the purposes of language. I want to learn how we can use language in this class to serve this purpose of communicating what we think. So in order to do that, we're going to identify problems and definitions in language that I want you to avoid in this class. The first thing is meaning. Meaning happens here. The what we think is what we mean to say. If you and I were having a discussion about philosophy and you pointed out to me that I communicated my idea in a way that was unclear or was saying something you don't think I meant to say, you might go, you said this, do you actually mean this? Is that what you mean? Meaning, is that what you mean? And I could go, I understand, I'm sorry, I could have been clear in my communication. What I meant to say was blah, 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 blah. That's a super important skill that they do teach us. And I think is actually just a next level important skill to unlock in life. I do this in my capacity as a philosopher and instructor of philosophy, but I actually do that way more in my work in healthcare because it is very important. You're very precise with your language in healthcare, obviously, and being able to step back and go, I understand that that is what you heard. That was not what I meant. Let me clarify for you. Is super important. And actually, at Ohio State, where I work, there's a major move to integrate critical thinking skills and closed loop communication skills into the workplace right now, which is funny, but I digress. This this class is what I want you to care about. And that goes for me assessing you, yes. It also goes for now that you are interacting with your peers more, you're looking at what they're saying more, you have to give them charity or the benefit of the doubt. They might say something that you think is not put beautifully, or that is maybe you don't think super sophisticated, or you think suggests something that doesn't actually mean what you think they're trying to say in their post, for example. When we get lost in the sauce of judging each other's language about the words that they use that you disliked, unless they've used language that is unhelpful in the sense that it actively undermines their ability to communicate, if it's something like you wish they would have communicated in a way that you prefer, you're engaging with their ideas at this level and you're not going to what they mean. If I disagreed with you very seriously about traffic lights, to bring this example up again, if I really disagreed with you about traffic lights and you made the conversation about the stylistics, that's to say, the stylistic choices, the choices I make to express myself through my language, if those are the only sort of counters to the ideas I present you have for me, then you are radically unable to counteract my argument. You can really only bully me. You can only tell me you don't like how I explain my ideas or myself. So the first thing I want us to think about is meaning. Language is hard. So when you're addressing ideas, don't address what they say, address what they mean. Address what they think or what they want to say. A good test for this is imagine you're that person. Imagine you believe whatever it is that they're saying they believe, and just in your head role play and pretend they said it the way you would have said it, okay? if you that's a good way to get yourself past your tendency to judge people's language, because we all have this tendency. But what we can do as people who think critically is you can step back and say, how would I have put that if I was that person? Get past the language barrier, put it into your own words. Once you can put it into your own words, you've done the mental exercise of trying to understand what they mean, right? When I give you readings, when I give you lectures, when you're watching these videos, I am using new and different ways of communicating knowledge. The content, the thing I mean, the thing that I think as your instructor that I'm trying to communicate to you is through line. I, the author of our book, other instructors who teach this class, we all sort of understand what arguments and language and premises are ourselves. Though the way we are communicating that knowledge is a little bit different, right? Even though the things that we're saying change from semester to semester, the things that we say change from person to person, what's important is the actual content of our ideas are the same, right? And in that same manner, what's important when we are thinking critically about people's opinions in the world and the reasons they believe them is not so much how they're saying those opinions or how much they're saying why they believe those things. It's really about this level of meaning. This is what I mean by meaning. So meaning is the goal. Remember, meaning is what we're trying to do. So meaning is the thing that we want to work with in language this week. There are going to be two ways where it can be hard to figure out what someone means. The first one is vagueness. What does it mean to be vague? The book defines vagueness as problematic unspecificity. Philosophers love big words. Let's break apart this word. Problematic means introducing a problem, right? Something about this word vagueness, something about being vague creates a problem. What does it create a problem for? Our ability to work with the meaning of what people are saying, right? If the goal is getting past what they say and figuring out what they think, what they mean, this thing, vagueness creates a problem for that goal. What problem does it create? Unspecificity. What is unspecificity? There's a word in here, specific. What does it mean to be specific? If I said be more specific, what I mean is hone in more clearly. Use language that is more descriptive, deduces more possibilities of what you mean. Hone in and use the language to describe exactly what it is you want to tell me. That's what it means to be specific. So what would unspecificity mean? It would mean to have honed out. You can think of almost like a camera in focus. Specificity, or being specific, is turning your camera to focus so that the lens can more clearly capture me in this video, right? If I made it blurry, it would be less specific. There would be less focus on me. And you might even still be able to see me here, even if I was a blur. You know, if I take off my glasses right now, everything becomes a blur. I might still be able to see shapes and see through the fog what you're suggesting. But unspecificity is that sort of fog, like blurry state, in a way that specificity is more focused. It's crisper, it's clear. Let's think about a few examples. These are from the book, so I am stealing these. Water is hot. If I just said the sentence, water is hot, that would be really unspecific. What water? And what do I mean by hot? This might sound like I'm being nitpicky here, which I am. Like I'm being nitpicky. That's what I think philosophers do, is we're nitpicky. But think about how hot coffee is fresh outside the pot, and think about how hot ocean water is. If ocean water was as hot as coffee out the pot, which I actually doubt is even possible, but like let's say it was at the maximum temperature it could be, that would be pretty hot. But water does not have to be that hot in order for us to say water is hot. If you gave me a glass of room temperature water and I wanted ice cold water, I would say the water is hot or the water is warm, right? Also saying water is hot. Well, what do you mean water is hot? Do you mean that glass of water for my example? Do you mean the ocean for my other example? Like, usually this sentence, water is hot, or if I said this water or that water is hot, usually in a certain context, you and I would be able to understand what we're talking about. But if I'm asking you to write a discussion board post, or if later in your academic career you're writing a paper, your audience or people who are engaging with your idea might not similarly understand the context you're writing into, and you might have to say, I believe that water is hot, or it seems to me that water is hot. And by water, I mean this body of water is hot in that, in this case, blah, 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 it is this way. You know, you have to think about water and hot can mean all kinds of things. If I just say the word to you, water, that refers to the same water that is in my water bottle right there, which is the same water that is in the oceans, which is the same water that's in fresh water, like bodies, lakes, rivers, is the same water that's in puddles in the streets, is the same water that's in our sewage system, like is the same water that I can go order at McDonald's, is the same water that I could go still boil water and have water that is hot and boiling. Like that water can mean all kinds of things. And while it might seem obvious to you, oh yeah, I mean this water, duh. I think it's super important as a skill that you go, by water I mean this, by hot I mean this. Or be prepared at least if someone goes, what do you mean by hot? It might be hot in this example, but in all examples, is it hot? That's something I've seen you all do to each other, which is so cool to look at, by the way. But that is a unspecificity problem. That is vagueness. It is vague what you mean in that sentence. If I just put this word up here at the top of the class, water is hot. Sorry, the sentence, I said word. If I put this sentence up here at the top of the class, water is hot, and I didn't provide for you any context for that sentence, that water is hot, it seems to me entirely possible that you and I could have imagined two different scenes about water being hot, right? So it's blurry again. All of a sudden, the sentence's meaning, the thing we're trying to get is blurry. Because if I just said water is hot and you and I have totally different ideas about what water being hot looks like, it's blurry. It's vague. Here's another example. That man is tall. Okay, what do you mean by tall? I'm 6'3", right? Maybe if you saw me in person, that would be clear to understand. You would know better. No, but I like to be tall to me means something that it means to my mom, who is shorter, who is still a pretty tall woman. So it means something different, even more to maybe one of my coworkers who's 4'11", right? Tall meant something different to all of us. Does that mean you can't ever say the word tall? No, obviously not. In fact, actually, most of our language depends on some sort of contextual understanding about what we're saying. So I'm not saying here you can't use these words, tall, hot, these words that add context or actually help us more clearly imagine the scene happening. I'm not saying you can't use them, but I am saying every time you use them, you have to think about how specific is this? I describe specificity as like honing in, right? You have all of these possibilities that your language permits and trying to bring in as close as possible all of the possibilities so that you can focus on that one thing that you're trying to say that you mean, right? I am obsessed with this. I think a lot about how I can make people imagine precisely what I mean. I think that's super cool. I'm like geeking out right now, but like, geez, if I can get someone to picture what I am picturing with great detail, or they know what experience I am referring to in great detail based on the language I'm choosing, I think I succeeded as a writer or communicator. And I still use language like this. When I say hot or I say tall, I understand that that word can mean a lot of things. So then I go on to explain what I mean. What's the solution here? I've already told you. The solution is specificity. If vagueness is problematic unspecificity, the way that we solve that is by being specific. Like I said, water is hot. It seems to me that water is hot and that Water, which I define as this, is hot relative to this thing. That sort of way of using my language might seem like I'm doing the most, and I am. I'm adding a lot of words to try and get you to where I need you to go as the audience of whatever I am presenting you with, whether that's the audience of a speech or video, or if that's the audience in sense of the person reading something I've written. But that is how we get to the things we mean. We get rid of vagueness. Vagueness is a threat to understanding meaning. Vagueness is a different thing than the other enemy of understanding meaning, but these words seem super similar, so let's clarify the difference. This other enemy of understanding meaning is ambiguity. First example, the issue wasn't the words themselves, it's that we actually needed more words to be more specific. You have to add more in that vagueness example to hone in, right? To be more specific. Ambiguity happens because language is hard, but I'm sure you've encountered before words that have multiple definitions that at times literally mean different things. Let me think of an example. The first example are homonyms, right? Homonyms. Homonyms, if you don't know what a homonym is, we can break apart our word. Homo means same. Nym means name or word. Same name. Homonym. Homonyms are things where two different distinct things have the same word. The example that I think we use often is bark. You have bark on a tree. The sort of outer layer of a tree is called the tree's bark, but you also have a dog's bark. A dog barks, right? That word is spelled the same. It is the same word. It might have a different history of how they've developed. Sometimes homonyms do have different histories, but the fact remains we use the same word, the same morpheme, if you will, bark, to refer to that outer layer of a tree and to the thing that a dog does. So if I just gave you the word bark, you could interpret bark interpretations, multiple distinct interpretations. You could interpret bark as a dog barking, or you can interpret bark as the thing on a tree. So homonyms are like the classic example of what ambiguity is. The issue is not that I'm honing in my language. The issue is the language itself. The language literally allows multiple distinct interpretations to be true. We'll look at an example from the book. She critiqued the soccer team for playing poorly. Stop for a second, imagine this sentence. Well, she critiqued the soccer team for playing poorly. What did you just imagine? Did you imagine that the soccer team played poorly? And did you imagine a kid's soccer team maybe was playing soccer and the soccer team just did really bad? They played poorly? Or did you imagine that this woman, was critiquing the soccer team, but she did the critique itself poorly? The way she decided to critique the team was a poor critique or was an inappropriate critique. The way that she critiqued the soccer team for playing, she did so poorly, is a different type of sentence than the soccer team played poorly and she critiqued them for playing poorly. In the same sentence, it could either be the woman who was critiquing the team that is doing something poorly, or it can be the soccer team itself playing poorly. This is ambiguity. If you chose one definition, you wouldn't have said my example was vague, because I described to you exactly what she did. I added you the context, I honed in. The only issue is the words I chose could just literally mean different things. There's also no homonym here, right? It's not that the word poorly represents two different things. It's just that the way our language works allowed for two different interpretations of the same sentence. Another example that the book gave was prostitutes appeal to the Pope. And he talks about, you could imagine on a news headline, prostitutes appeal to the Pope, right? This is a gotcha for the Pope. Suggesting in this headline, if you've heard of the fake news, like that sort of idea is trying to critique a practice in journalism, which is purposefully using ambiguity, right? The headline might say, prostitutes appeal to the Pope. And you might be suggesting by using that headline that the Pope is sexually interested or is visually interested, at least, in these prostitutes, right? They appeal to him. He finds them appealing. But ambiguity might be happening because what that sentence might have actually meant is that these prostitutes were appealing. This is to say, they were seeking guidance or absolution from the Pope. They were appealing to the Pope. That is a totally different interpretation based on the same sentence. And at times, people recognize ambiguity and use it as a tool, like they do in journalism sometimes, to get you to click on the article to read what it says, right? They purposefully use ambiguous or vague language to make you make assumptions about what they mean that isn't what they mean, so that when you actually investigate, you find out the thing they meant was something different, but they earned your click or your view. Another example, he fed her cat food. We'll do the same exercise. Stop, think. He fed her cat food. It's a little actually easier with language. I can add less ambiguity, but if you just read that sentence, he fed her cat food, you don't know whether or not he fed some girl cat food in like one of those like cat food dishes. You don't know if he did that, or you don't know if he just fed her cat. That sentence can mean both of those things. Both those interpretations are allowed by that sentence. Allowed means the reason both interpretations happened was not because you misunderstood. You've misunderstood nothing about the English language or the mechanics of the English language if you read both possible interpretations in these sentences that I've been giving you. The English language allows both. Both of those were meanings that made sense of grammar mechanics. That's different than, there's this example we think about with the Oxford comma. I'm sure you've heard this when you've heard about the Oxford comma. Some people say, we need the Oxford comma, here's why. Let's eat grandma is different than let's eat, comma, grandma. That's not ambiguity, right? It's not that we forgot a comma in this sentence, he fed her cat food. There's no issue with the English here, or adding a comma anywhere is not going to add any more specificity about what the sentence meant. He fed her cat food literally can mean either he fed some girl food that is meant for cats, or it can mean he saw a cat that belonged to her and he fed it. Both of those things are allowed. What's the solution to solving ambiguity? Articulate the proper interpretation. And that is the way we do this in philosophy all the time. So it's the one that my brain is going to, honestly. I know there are other ways to do this, but I would say if I was writing a paper, he fed her cat food in that he gave food meant for cats to the girl. Or I would say he fed her cat food in that he had already been in the pantry and knew that the cat needed fed, so he decided to go ahead and feed her cat for her. Right? The way you solve ambiguity is you tell the reader, I know this is ambiguous, so here's what I mean, by the way, right? I know you could interpret this in multiple ways, so here's what I mean. You could just be like, should critique the soccer team for playing poorly, period. The soccer team only got this many goals. That sentence adds context. Now I can really guess what you meant here. Or, should critique the soccer team for playing poorly. The way she spoke to the children was inappropriate, and I'm disappointed in her. Now I can use some context to understand what you meant here in your sentence. That is how you solve ambiguity. There's what we say, what we mean. The goal is getting to what we mean. There are these things that make it hard for us to understand what a person means: vagueness and ambiguity. Vagueness is problematic unspecificity. To solve it, get specific. Ambiguity allows multiple interpretations. The way to solve it is tell me the interpretation. That is how we get past the fluff that people purposefully or accidentally put in the way to make it hard to understand what it is we mean.